I've studied and practiced, to some extent, Western magic for my entire life.
Yeah.
Okay. I've studied and practiced to some extent Western magic for my entire life. And in recent years, I've had a growing interest in natural and folk magic. And last semester, I taught a course on magic and earth. And this talk is a reflection on my experience teaching that class. Last weekend, my partner and I attended a talk by mycologist Paul Stamets on his new book, Psilocybin Mushrooms in Their Natural Habitats. During the talk, Stamets discussed gastromycetation, an evolutionary process among sequoiaceoid fungi, through which they appear to be developing a closed cap, though, like those that we see in puffball mushrooms. When asked to imagine a mushroom, most people would imagine a classic open cap or umbra with the gills beneath. It's the gills that carry the spores, which are necessary for reproduction. Puffballs and other closed mushrooms require intervention by an animal to break open the sac and carry the spores. Birds that eat puffballs have evolved to do just this. Stamets suggests that the mushroom and the bird are communicating with one another through a shared consciousness. This assertion reminded me of a book, How Forests Think, Towards an Anthropology Beyond the Human by Eduardo Kohn. Kohn did fieldwork among the Runa people of the highland rainforests of Ecuador, and his work is mainly about the necessity of overcoming our all-too-human tendency to operate from the assumption that we're the only beings on the planet to have, use, and understand systems of representation.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you bring the mic a little bit closer? We're getting feedback from the online folks that it's still not. So that we're like, bring yourself closer to the mic, maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, there you go.
Is that better? All right. You can interrupt me again, it's
Okay.
fine. Okay.
Go for it.
So his work is mainly about the necessity of overcoming our all-too-human tendency to operate from the assumption that we are the only beings on the planet to have, use, and understand systems of representation. He argues non-human life forms also represent the world. This more expansive understanding of representation is hard to appreciate because our social theory, whether humanist or post-humanist, structuralist or post-structuralist, conflates representation with language. Kohn argues that meaning, broadly defined, is part and parcel of the living world beyond the human. If we're to engage with the forest on its own terms, to enter its relational logic, to think with its thoughts, we must become attuned to these. Furthermore, he argues that we are colonized by certain ways of thinking about relationality. We can only imagine the ways in which selves and thoughts might form associations through our assumptions about the forms of associations that structure human language. And then in ways that often go unnoticed, we project these assumptions onto non-humans without realizing it. We attribute to non-humans properties that are our own. And then to compound this, we narcissistically ask them to provide us with corrective reflections of ourselves. Kohn continues, so how should we think with forests? How should we allow the thoughts in and of the non-human world to liberate our thinking? Forests are good to think because they themselves think. Forests think. I want to take this seriously. I want to ask, what are the implications of this claim for our understandings of what it means to be human in a world that extends beyond us? Last year, I began taking a course on poison plant medicine with the herbalist Catherine Soley. Toxic plant species have been used medicinally for centuries. For example, the leaves of the foxglove are used to manufacture digitalis, a potent heart remedy. Interestingly, the plant's leaves show a rhythmical growth pattern that's considered a signature of heart remedies. Much can be learned through the study of plant chemistry and morphological signatures. However, the course is less concerned with the medicinal use of such plants than with using introspection to contact and interact with the energetic signature of the plant. I was familiar with distance healing and how some healers need no more than a name to do their work, but I found the idea that I could connect with the energetic signature of a plant without having seen it, even in a picture, challenging. At first, I felt I needed essences or tinctures from the plants that we were meditating upon, as if having some trace of material substance would effectuate a connection, but I learned over time that they were unnecessary. Through this work, I noticed that the essential qualities of the plants we worked with were immediately available. They invariably drew my attention to bodily, emotional, psychological, and spiritual blockages. When other students in the class discussed their meditations, I was amazed at the similarities between everyone's experiences. So I want to share a string of synchronicities that began with a meditation on the flower hellebore in Catherine's class. And here I'll be less concerned about the specific indication for health than I will be with the way a single meditation catalyzed an embodied awareness of the profound interconnectedness of all life. What Jung spoke of in terms of the rhizome when he wrote, this is from Memories, Dreams, Reflections, life has always seemed to me like a plant that lives on its rhizome. Its true life is invisible, hidden in the rhizome. The part that appears above ground lasts only a single summer. Then it withers away, an ephemeral apparition. When we think of the unending growth and decay of life and civilizations, we cannot escape the impression of absolute nullity. Yet I've never lost a sense of something that lives and endures underneath the eternal flux. What we see is the blossom which passes. The rhizome remains. So last fall, my partner and I both lost our mothers. They died within 3 weeks of one another. My own had been bedridden for months, and we knew she was nearing the end of her life. My partner's mother was apparently well, but developed pneumonia and was taken to hospital. The week she was admitted, I attended my weekly class with Catherine, and the plant that we were working with was hellebore. Hellebore is associated with, among other things, the myth of Demeter, her grief over her lost daughter Persephone, and so with death, rebirth, and the wrathful wisdom of the crone. It's even said in some myths that hellebore sprang from Demeter's tears, shed for her stolen child. So grief, mourning, but also fierceness. There's another deity, this time from India, who carries this fierce energy of loss and grief. Dhamavati, the smoky one, is one of the 10 Mahavidyas, tantric goddesses who are representative energies of the one universal mother, Mahashakti. Dhamavati is the crone form of the deity. Often portrayed as an old, ugly widow, she is associated with things considered inauspicious and unattractive in Hinduism, such as the crow and the Chaturmasya, which is the 4 months, that means 4 months period. The goddess is often depicted carrying a winnowing basket on a horseless chariot or riding a crow, usually in a cremation ground. Winnowing basket, crow, and horseless chariot are all related to funerary rites. This next passage is from Alain Danilou's book, The Myths and Gods of India. Danilou writes, Dhamavati rules over the rainy season. For 4 months, the solar light is hidden by the evil water spirit. This corresponds in the cosmic cycle to the night of the gods, when the spirits of darkness rule. The night of Dhamavati is the night of death. No ritual can be performed during that time, no pilgrimage, no marriage, no initiation. At the end of that period, the rule of the light returns and the festival of lights takes place. The peaceful reign of Kamala begins. Hellebore, then, is a plant medicine that brings us into the presence of the intelligence of the plant, which is related to grief, loss, cremation, and boundary crossing. We discussed all of this in class after the meditation. When class ended, I opened my balcony door and smelled burning wood. I live in the Bay Area and it was fire season, but until then the air had been smokeless. Now, after meditating on hellebore and discussing its mythological associations and attributes, I smelled the smell of a nearby fire on the breeze. My mind drifted to my mother-in-law, sick in India, and to my own mother, also sick and in a hospital in Florida. I thought of the tradition of burning the dead in Hinduism, and how both my mother-in-law and my mother would be cremated when they died. Although we were hopeful when the doctor at the hospital assured us that my mother-in-law's infection was under control, just 1 day later, we got the news that she had passed away suddenly. We had to catch the next available flight to Delhi. My partner's family held a traditional cremation using wood built into a pyre, and my partner told me that it was traditional to carry the ashes and what remained of the bones to the Ganga, the Ganges, and submerge them in her sacred waters. I can't adequately explain the experience of the elements and their transformations through this process for me. The earth of the body, the funeral fire, the air carrying the spirit skyward through an aperture formed by circling crows, the washing of my mother-in-law's remaining bones with water and milk, and finally the return of the remains to the waters of the Ganges, welcoming one of her children back into her motherly embrace. I mentioned Chaturmasya, a 4-month period marked by austerities and ritual immersions in holy waters. Reading about this, I recalled how images of gods fashioned out of clay for pujas are submerged in rivers when festivities end, return to their source like the submersion of the remains of the cremated. Chaturmasya runs from roughly the end of June to the beginning of November. My mother-in-law passed away on October 22nd. Durga Puja had ended less than 2 weeks earlier, and Kali Puja was to be celebrated on October 31st, our Halloween, the Celtic holiday of Samhain, when the veil between our world and the underworld is thinnest. We carried my mother-in-law's ashes to Rishikesh to scatter them, but it was too crowded there. We weren't sure what to do, but we trusted that we would be led to the right place. From where we stood, we saw a butterfly flying back toward the car, so we followed it. Once in the car, my partner decided that we would head north out of the city to somewhere more rural and quieter. My father-in-law had been in the Indian military, and so our drivers on this trip were military. They told us there was a training facility for water and mountain rescue nearby on the river. So we pulled the car over, and they called the commander, who agreed to allow us to come. As this decision was being made, I looked out my window and saw hundreds of tiny white butterflies flying around what looked like a tumulus. I turned to my partner and said that we were headed in the right direction. We drove another 20 minutes and entered the encampment, which was filled with butterflies. I'm sure that butterflies are a regular occurrence at that time of year in that region, but everything that was happening had the quality of synchronicity. I probably don't need to remind folks here that the Greek word for butterfly, psyche, is also the word for soul or spirit. Before returning home, we asked our driver if there was a Kali temple in the area and where we could offer prayers. There was a mandir on a hill, that's a temple, on a hill overlooking the Ganges and the city of Haridwar, just a few miles south of Rishikesh. The temple called Sri Dakshin Kali Temple is a Shakti Pita, a sacred site where one of the body parts of Shiva's first wife, Sati, an embodiment of Mahashakti, fell when Shiva, in grief and rage at her death, danced the Tandav dance with her in his arms, scattering her decomposing body to the winds. It is said that Sati's Brahmarandra, with the fontanelle at the top of the head, landed where this temple was built, and it's through the fontanelle that the spirit is said to leave the body at death during a cremation. They open it physically. Dakshin Kali is a form of Kali known as the Mother of Transformation. At the temple, a sadhu who was staying there directed us down an ancient-looking marble staircase to a shrine. The walls were covered with relief carvings in black stone of the 10 Mahavidyas, including Tamavati. The shrine was extremely powerful. A central fire burned constantly, and several trishuls or tridents, a symbol of Shiva, protruded from the pile of ashes in the pit. We collected some ashes to take with us and lingered in the shrine to meditate. Back in Delhi, we completed several other tasks required for the 12-day ritual. And on the final day, which was, I believe, November 3rd, I received a text from my sister who told me that my mother had entered hospice and that I needed to get back to Florida as soon as possible. My partner, who was still in mourning, needed to stay back with her father, and so I traveled alone. In Florida, one of my sisters picked me up at the airport and brought me to the hospice, where my mother had taken neither food nor drink for 3 days. She was weak, but knew I was there. We spent the day with her and returned home. The next day, I determined to stay with her until she passed. My family stayed most of the day. I spent the night. And the next morning, my mother stopped communicating. The nurse said she felt that she would last another day and sent my family home in the evening. But after everyone left, upon listening more closely to my mother's breathing, the nurse said that she wouldn't make it through the night. I called my family back while the nurse went to get medicine. And as she gave my mother her morphine, she looked at her mouth and asked if I saw a blue ring that appears around the lips. And I did, and the nurse stepped back thoughtfully and said quietly that my mother was imminent. She said she would return as soon as possible and left me alone in the room. I called my partner in India and told her what was happening and kept her on the phone. I sat stroking my mother's hair and holding her hand while she took her final breaths. In June, my mother had told me that she would be around until October. I always thought she reminded me of Yoda. She knew when she was going to go. She died on November 8th. She also said that she would not leave until my father, who had died in 2000, came for her. And in the moments before my mother died, I glanced briefly at a photograph of my father that was sitting next to her bedstead, and I would swear that I saw him wink and smile. And I knew that he had come to take her home. Earlier, I mentioned my plant meditation on hellebore and how the plant was related to the crone energy of Dhamavati. My mother was 92 when she died. My mother-in-law, 88. Dhamavati was associated with widowhood. My mother was a widow, and though my mother-in-law was not, she had lost a child and had been exiled from home in Pakistan during partition. Dhamavati is associated with grief, and both had experienced their share. I told you that Dhamavati, the smoky one, accepted offerings of tobacco. My mother was an inveterate smoker. I also said that Dhamavati was a patron goddess of gamblers, and my mother's favorite occupation, besides smoking, was gambling. Our mothers died within 3 weeks of one another around Chaturmasya, Kali Puja, and Halloween, coinciding with my meditation on hellebore, a plant associated with crone energy, death, cremation, and boundary crossing. Between the death of my mother-in-law and my own mother was the American election and the defeat of Kamala Harris. The name Kamla, as Danalu mentioned earlier, means lotus, the flower symbolizing purity and healing. In the quote from Danalu I shared earlier, he wrote, "At the end of Chaturmasya, the rule of light returns and the festival of lights, which is Diwali, takes place. The peaceful reign of Kamla begins." I can't help but feel the irony there. This was a missed opportunity for America and a death of the Divine Mother in our culture. But it came at a time when my partner and I lost our mothers. It was not lost on me. One of the subjects that we've been talking about in class with Catherine was how plants would often grow in areas that some environmental issue had arisen, that the plant itself seemed particularly well suited to heal. For example, Japanese knotweed grows rampant in New England and is considered an invasive species, but it's also a master herb for the treatment of Lyme disease, which is also rampant in New England. In the Midwest, the chemical glyphosate, or glyphosate, is widely used on corn. Glyphosate is not a safe chemical for humans, and it causes lung, throat, and skin issues. One of the master herbs for lung, throat, and skin issues is poison hemlock, which has lately begun to grow wildly all over the Midwest. The herb mullein, which is helpful in combating asthma and bronchitis, is known to grow widely along busy car thoroughfares, where the exhaust is heavy. I'm reminded of a conversation I once had with a biodynamic farmer many years ago who told me that the weeds that grow naturally around our homes will be the medicines that we need. Plants, he argued, somehow know this. I wonder how hellebore came to me. It's understood to protect one from evil spirits, and both the time of year and the deaths of loved ones could open the door to such boundary crossings. In some cultures, myths, folk tales, fairy tales, and other stories tell of how some god or other turns into a plant as a gift for human beings. This is a way of saying that a deeper intelligence is at work on our planet that we are connected to as a birthright. Many of us gaze upward to transcendent divinity, and many gaze downward to immanent earth. According to Jung, the upper and lower are connected in the unus mundus. They are actually one and the same. However, within the psyche, we only get glimpses of this connection through images, dreams, visions, and symbols. We see only partially, if at all, that the world and its myriad life forms are us. What I've said about plants is also true of animals. Last year, for 3 months, between March and June, I stayed with my mother after she had become bedridden to deal with the stresses of working full-time and helping to look after her. When our aide arrived every morning, I would go to walk to the gym and then to the supermarket and then back home. My walk was about 10 miles, and because I was in a suburban area entirely on concrete, excuse me, I had an old ankle injury that caused my left ankle to swell. And I came home every day after my walk, sat on my bed, and put my foot up. Each time I did this, my mother's cat would climb onto the bed and lie across my injured ankle. After a few days of the cat repeating this ritual, I mentioned it to my mother, who told me that he would come into her room at night and lie on her chest. My mother was dying of COPD, and she was concerned that the cat lying on her chest was going to make it more difficult for her to breathe. But she also understood that the cat was doing this because that was where her wound was. I don't know what the cat was thinking, but it seemed to me that he was acting from a place deeper than calculated thought. He somehow intuited our need and acted without reflection. This reminds me of my favorite passage from Jung's Red Book. I've shared this before, so if any of you have heard this repeated by me, please indulge me. Nothing happens in which you are not entangled in a secret manner, for everything has ordered itself around you and plays your innermost. Nothing in you is hidden to things, no matter how remote, how precious, how secret it is. It adheres in things. Your dog robs you of your father who passed away long ago and looks at you as he did. The cow in the meadow has intuited your mother and charms you with total calm and security. The stars whisper your deepest mysteries to you. And this, from David White, the poet, put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. The kettle is singing even as it pours you a drink. The cooking pots have left their arrogant aloofness and seen the good in you at last. All the birds and creatures of the world are unutterably themselves. Everything is waiting for you. The task then is to engage with the world in a way that overcomes our alienation from it. In my own work, I draw from researchers who approach this topic from various disciplines, both scholarly and practice-related in the field of magic, mostly. Most of all from Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz, whose work has convinced me that creation itself is a living symbol projected from the universal psyche, and that includes all of us. Josephine McCarthy is a ritual magician who emphasizes that magical practitioners should strive to be aware of the beings and powers of the land upon which they practice. She writes, "The relationship between the magician and nature is one of cooperation. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, rather you nurture and protect it. In turn, the spirits and beings within nature nurture and protect you." McCarthy's teachings are rooted in Thelemic, Golden Dawn, and European ritual magic. She often talks about the inner desert and the crossing of the abyss. Much like Jung's psychoidal realm, this is a place where the transcendent and the immanent meet in the body, or just outside the body. I've spent my life gazing out over this abyss. Traditional witch and writer on fairy magic, Robin Artisan, argues from a more poetic perspective. The ancients knew that this mortal world of things seen was just the half-glow of an immortal light, another world unseen, and that their lives, bound in temporary casings of the earth and cast into the river of time, were the result of immortal lives which were hidden, yet potent enough to affect even this world. And this truth bound not just men, but trees, mountains, stars, beasts, and all else sensible. Folk healer and herbologist Corinne Boyer draws from the deep well of folk traditions in American and European witchcraft. She writes and teaches about spirits and their relationship to the plant world. I'm currently taking a class with her entitled Spirits, Dreams, and Plants, in which we are taking plant journeys, very much like those taught by Soli, but from a more folk magical perspective. Our meditations only confirm for me the mystery of the rhizome and how we can tap into it to carry us across the abyss. Boyer has actually written about the hellebore. She says hellebore is an otherworldly plant and flower, so handsome in late winter with its leathery evergreen leaves and stunning flowers that beg one to get closer. Absolute perfection with bold details in this hearty bloom, yet she lacks all fragrance, like flowers fit for the dead. I'm also indebted to the work of David Abram, who argues for humans to expand their understanding of language and agency through direct experience to include the more than human world. His works seek, in his words, a new way of speaking, one that enacts our interbeing with the earth rather than blinding us to it. A language that stirs a new humility in relation to other earthborn beings, whether spiders or obsidian outcrops or spruce limbs bent low by clumped snow. A style of speech that opens our senses to the sensuous in all its multiform strangeness. Graham Harvey draws from Abram's work and theorists like Irving Hallowell, arguing for the rehabilitation of the word animism and a recognition that the world is full of persons, only some of whom are human, and that life is always lived in relationship with others. Anthropologist Nastasia Martin writes about a grizzly bear attack in the wilds of Kamchatka, an encounter that tore not only her flesh, but the veil between worlds, leaving her a medka, a two-souled being, half human, half bear. Her profound book, In the Eye of the Wild, is a meditation on hidden fate and the gulf that lies between and binds together this world and the world of spirits. And of course, the work of Eduardo Kohn, who argues that we need to recognize that everything in nature is a being, and further, that the more than human world shares a common language that many, if not most of us, have forgotten or no longer recognize. Scholars in many fields, primarily through indigenous research, have been taking a more ensouled approach to the natural world. Magical practitioners from all cultures, who within academia are often held at arm's length, have been doing this all along. It's this subject that I'm most interested in and try to explore in my classes. The meeting of human and the more than human, the inclusion of rejected knowledge in our explorations, and the honoring of inner experience. These writers exhort us to live and do research through the horizontal, to see beyond the seeming of things into the deeper connections and conversations that all of nature is having, and which is our birthright, if only we learn to listen.
Thank you so much. That was very inspiring and moving. Thank you. I guess my question has to do with your studies in magic. You know, so much of the current cultural thinking, popular, let's say, around magic is about producing some sort of effect. Is that the basis of your studies, or does it have something more to do, it sounds almost like, with connection and enlivenment and wholeness?
Yeah, a lot, much of magical practice has to do with manifesting one's will, right? And there are communities for whom magic is the last resort, when all political and social power is taken from them and they lack the voice. They can turn to magic, sometimes for things that we would consider to be maybe harming or negative. And I can't comment on that, because when people are desperate, then practices sometimes get desperate. For other magicians, some of them, it's about the effect. It's about being able to change some aspect of the world. And I think that, Eastern traditions have a lot to teach us about this, especially Indian traditions, that along the way, as you develop yourself, and I have a more evolutionary approach, and I'm not talking about evolution of consciousness, I'm just talking about our personal evolution, and that the ultimate goal is communion and union with the totality. It's a wholeness, it's a kind of an integral wholeness. And along the way, you develop what are called in India siddhis, right? You can develop powers and abilities. You can read minds, you can affect, move things, objects, or levitate. I mean, there are all kinds of stories about this. The objective is to take note of it, because it's a signpost along the way, and then to let go of it. But there are many who choose to, who like that and choose to manifest that. And I can't condemn anybody not knowing what their karma is and not understanding the person that they are, that we all have to follow our own path. So, I mean, in some ways it's buyer beware. The world is a dangerous place, and there are people out there practicing the magical arts that are probably have ill intent, and there are others who are just very powerful, and you need to be careful around them and show respect. My personal path is much more about magic as a way of being, a way of embodiment in the world. I'm less interested in using it in a manipulative way, only because at 66 years old, I've had to learn the hard way that if I have power, I tend to misuse it. So I choose not to. Maybe at some point I'll get over that and I'll be able to hold it differently. But I keep that aspect of it at arm's length. Does that make sense?
Any other questions here in the room? Comments? Yeah.
This is more of a comment. So I think it's interesting that it's Easter weekend, and I actually experienced the same experience with my mother passing away. I was 16. My mother passed away at 33, young age, leukemia, and it was when we buried her, it was dragonflies. So I think that it's amazing to be here. I wasn't expecting to be here. And you're talking about synchronicities and plant medicine. And I'm seeing this connection in a broader aspect of like this internal, the internal healing that's happening, just listening you speaking about this. So thank you so much. And that brought back a lot of memories. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Anything else?
Jonathan, is there anything?
Yeah, there's a couple here. So somebody asked, can you share one key tip on learning to listen?
Well, my partner is listening, and I'm sure that she would have something choice to say about my listening abilities. I think throughout most of my life, the world snuck up on me, and I would only realize it after the fact. And I think most of the time I only realize it after the fact. But there are these moments that come where I realize that I'm in a moment, and that the experience that I'm having is redolent with synchronicity or with meaning at a deep level, and I can kind of surf that. Yeah, tips, meditation, I think, in some form, being able to settle ourselves. The mind is going to do what it does, and maybe understand that the mind is really not what we are. That's not easy. And I would say study synchronicity, study Jung and von Franz on synchronicity, and I found that extremely helpful throughout my life. There's a statement from the Mutus Liber, which is an alchemical book, and I'm going to get this wrong, but in essence, what it says is pray, read, 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 read again, do the work, and you shall realize. So a lot of it is study. You just have to keep studying, keep learning, hearing what other people have experienced. And prayer, which is an attitude of dropping into the heart for me, out of my head, which is just buzzing all the time. And doing the work, which means that I have to take it seriously, that it's about manifesting in the world what it is that I believe in my heart. And that's the bridge that we're attempting to cross. And that's, for me, that's what magic is about, making that bridge. Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm glad I made it, and it's good to see you. Sorry, this is very loud. I'm a psychotherapist, ecotherapist, and I have my office is an office that opens up to my garden. So I bring a lot of plants from my garden into my office. And hellebore is one of my favorite plants, and it's blooming right now. And so I had some fresh bouquets of hellebore and some dried hellebore in my office. And I actually didn't know the qualities of hellebore that you're sharing. But just this past week, a patient of mine came in and she said, wow, that's like a plant from another world, and was just like really stunned by it. And what's coming to me as you're sharing is just the importance of having that plant around in fostering the grief work that I tend to do, and the transformation work, and really kind of being connected around death that a lot of people tend to be processing with me, and just the synchronicity of that plant coming to me without my knowing these qualities is just really moving to me right now. So thank you.
They find us.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And it is a boundary protector.
And a boundary protector.
And in class last night, in Corinne Bohr's class last night, one of the students was saying that he plants hellebore outside his windows to keep the spirits from being able to gain easy entry. So, yeah, it's a fascinating plant.
Yeah, thank you.
I have another question online. Is that all right if I jump in?
It's okay with me.
I think, yeah,
One more?
one last one.
One more, okay. But here's a question and comment here. Thank you for sharing your deeply personal and moving story and for your bravery to bring these essential topics into the academic field. I'm wondering how you navigate cultural sensitivity in practicing and bringing these topics into academic conversations.
Yeah, it's a really important topic. It's very tricky, and I'm sure that I stumble more than I succeed. I'm teaching a class called Roots of American Magic, co-teaching a class called Roots of American Magic next fall with the magician Lou Flores, who has a background in African diasporic traditions and also Latinx traditions. And it was just obvious that I couldn't teach this class by myself, because drawing from the African traditions, it's a sensitive area given the politics in our country and given my own embodied reality as a white, male, European, of European descent. So it's really important to build those bridges, and important also to understand that every step that we take in the world, we're having an effect on everyone around us. To never forget the history that we're embedded in, to take it really seriously, that we have to take care of what we say and what we do. So yeah, this has been a challenge, and I try to stay. I teach within the Western kind of quadrant in East-West psychology, but you can't, especially if you're doing Jungian work in the amplificatory method, you can't help but draw from other cultures. And I just have to keep telling myself and my students that when we look at material from other cultures, we're looking at ourselves. We're not necessarily seeing them. Jung actually felt that we shouldn't, he lived in a different time, but he felt that it was improper for like Europeans, for instance, to go to India and take on Indian philosophy and Indian religion as if it were its own, because they weren't raised within that cultural milieu. He said it's a really tricky thing to do. Of course, we live in a much more global world today, and there are people who do this. Jonathan, for instance, has spent 10 years living in India, studying Indian philosophy and Indian music. So it's possible. It's much more possible today than it was back then. But I think we still need to be really sensitive that we never really understand another culture unless we've been raised multiculturally, and even then. Okay. Thank you.